Welcome to the BamaNewsNow.com podcast. I'm David Preston, your host of these podcasts and the founder and editor of the news site that is dedicated to Alabama news and information. I'm here with David McIntosh, the president of Club for Growth. Welcome.
Great to be with you. How's everything going?
It is hot and sunny and humid down here. Well, introduce us a little bit to yourself and to and to Club for Growth and what y'all do.
Yeah, so Club for Growth is the leading conservative political group. We are organized to advocate for free market and limited government principles. And then we've got a PAC with our members, probably about 10,000 members around the country, who send in donations to really good candidates that are champions for that freedom and that limited government. And then we also have a super PAC, Club for Growth Action, that will come in an election and run ads on behalf of the candidates that we've endorsed. We ended up making a huge difference in a lot of Republican primaries because we'll back the conservative, and the more moderate mainstream party will usually pick somebody else. But the candidates we pick tend to be the winners, and they fight for the principles once they get to Washington.
And that's kind of why we had you on today to talk about the races and the runoff specifically on July 14th, that you have made endorsements in. And obviously we'll start off with the race that's most important to everybody that's listening to this podcast and everybody in Alabama, and that is the runoff in the Republican primary between former Auburn head football coach Tommy Tuberville and Jeff Sessions. Y'all have endorsed Tommy Tuberville in this runoff, I believe. And
we have.
Tell me why y'all endorsed Coach Tuberville.
So Coach Tuberville is a real leader for freedom and limited government and free market economics. We first met him when he was starting to think about running for this race, when it was clear that Republicans needed to have a really strong candidate to take back that Senate seat. By the way, Alabama could end up deciding which party has the majority in the United States Senate based on the outcome of that race. And so as we got to know Coach Tuberville, we realized he was for free markets, cutting taxes, reducing the government spending, and that he would stand up and defend President Trump and his agenda really strongly. And poll after poll told us Alabama voters most wanted to have a senator who would do that, who would align with the president, wouldn't vote to impeach him the way the incumbent senator has, and would be a good, loyal champion for the effort to clean up Washington. And that's Coach Tuberville. He's done a great job in the campaign of laying out those ideas. Now, Jeff Sessions is known and as a former senator. I respect Jeff as an individual, but I think we just ended up concluding that somebody like the coach would bring fresh blood to this and be able to work with the president.
So your endorsement of Coach Tuberville isn't necessarily an anti-Sessions endorsement, more so you like Tommy Tuberville better.
That's right. That's right. I've known Senator Sessions for a long time and know him to be a good man. I think the problem he ran into as Attorney General would make it hard for him as a senator to really work closely with President Trump. Whereas Coach Tuberville, the president's a fan of his, and he would be able to help the president, but also I think carry the water for folks in Alabama to the president about what it is folks in Alabama need him to do.
And now we'll shift gears a little bit here, and we'll talk about the race I'm most familiar with, and that is the race to replace my retiring Congressman Bradley Byrne, which is a Republican runoff between Mobile County Commissioner Jerry Carl and former state senator who used to be my state senator in Montgomery, Bill Hightower. Talk a little bit about, you have endorsed Senator Hightower in this race, and you endorsed him early in the runoff when there was 5 candidates in the race, I believe. So talk a little bit about why you're supporting Senator Hightower.
Yes, David, you're absolutely right. And I think Bill Hightower was our first endorsement in Alabama this cycle. We met with him early on, and he is the complete package. You know him because he served as your state senator. He was one of the Republicans that fought against the effort to raise the gas tax. even though there was a lot of pressure locally in Mobile and elsewhere for different add-ons related to the port. But he said, look, we don't need to raise taxes to get the job done in Alabama. And I'm going to stand up for voters and citizens there who shouldn't be sending more money to the government. And that's the type of attitude we need to see in Washington and Congress, right? Especially with all of the effort now to spend, and Nancy Pelosi coming back and saying, hey, I want another $3 trillion to give away to liberal governments in California and New York. We need folks like Bill Hightower who will stand up and in a principled way fight for those conservative principles. And so
Yeah,
we endorsed him. I think he will be a great congressman.
yeah. The thing I was most impressed with him as his time as state senator was when the BP oil spill happened. You know, the states all sued BP, and they ended up settling with BP, and the state got around $1 billion. Well, they got more than $1 billion, but this specific bucket, quote unquote, of money was for economic damages to the state, and he really fought to try to keep that money down here on the coast. And while he was ultimately unsuccessful in keeping 80% of the money down here, he did keep 20%, because I fervently believe that if he or somebody else didn't spearhead that effort to fight Montgomery's efforts to spend that money mainly covering Medicaid shortfall deficits, that all of the money that for economic damages to the state would have ended up in Montgomery, and we wouldn't have seen a dollar of it down here. And he really fought to keep at least about 200 million of that down here on the coast. Of course, down being the redheaded stepchild of the state, we kind of don't have that voice in Montgomery that we need to say, no, you're not going to do it. But he was
Yeah,
effective in at least keeping some of it down here.
that's right. And that shows you the type of character he has, right? In his heart, he's thinking about what do folks need in Mobile and in Alabama, even though he's got experience traveling around the world doing economic trade deals, representing the Washington prayer breakfast because of his strong, deep Christian faith. But he stayed grounded and centered on where his home is and where his heart is in Mobile and in that first congressional district. We're excited about Bill Hightower. I think the other thing that will happen is he'll move up quickly to be a voice, a leader in Washington. He's smart, he's principled, he's a man of faith. He's going to be someone that other people will look to guide them in what they think needs to be done. And that's kind of the premium that Club for Growth looks for. There are 435 races. Maybe half of them are Republican races that we might be interested in, but it's a narrow, maybe a couple dozen people that we put our name and our money and our resources behind, because we believe they're going to be true champions for freedom and for America. And Bill Hightower is one of those.
Yeah, and when I first launched this site, I submitted 5 written questions to him and a bunch of other candidates to respond to. And when he responded, I could definitely tell, even if he didn't personally fill out the questions himself, whoever responded to those questions knew what they were talking about. If I was going to be a one-issue voter, my one issue would be Airbus. Airbus is sole commercial plane manufacturer in the United States is right here in Mobile, Alabama. Yet the Mobile, Alabama representative does not sit on the House subcommittee for aviation. And I'm like, you would think that with being the only American home of Airbus, our congressman should sit on that committee. And he said that without really saying what committees he would go for if elected, he kind of said that's one of the ones that I would seriously look at. And that impressed me, because like I said, if I was going to be a one-issue voter, Airbus would be my one issue.
It's interesting you mentioned that because that aligns his local interest for how to serve Alabama and Mobile with a national issue that we care about. There's a long-standing effort by Boeing and General Electric to keep something called the XM Bank, the Export-Import Bank, funded. But what they do is they end up picking winners and losers of American companies to subsidize, and they leave out people like Airbus that have manufacturing plants in America. And Bill immediately understood. He said, we don't need to have the government become a bank for these companies. They can go out in the marketplace and compete and be able to raise the money they need. That impressed us a lot. So his philosophy ended up lining up with his local interests, and he carried the water for both.
Yeah, don't get me started on Boeing. We could have a whole hours-long conversation about how the history of Boeing and Mobile in aviation, and it goes well past that air tanker refueling contract. If you remember that
Yeah.
whole debacle, it goes all the way back to the 787 Dreamliner plant in South Carolina being selected for it. But that we won't, because like I said, we will be here all day about that. If we'll just say my personal philosophy, my personal motto is: if it's Boeing, I ain't going, and it has nothing to do with the safety record of their new airplane. So
you've got your favorite, and you're sticking to it.
yes. So let's shift. So you're one more question about Bill Hightower in AL1, and then we'll move on to AL2. So
Yeah.
your endorsement of Bill Hightower, especially early on, you were correct. He was the first candidate in Alabama that you did endorse in this election cycle, is more because you really like him and he really fits the mold of what Club for Growth looks for, and not necessarily an anti-Jerry Carl or anti-opponent candidate position by Club for Growth, correct?
So in this case, I would say it's both. And I think Carl has a record that we would be very concerned about with a member of Congress, of supporting government tax increases, supporting a lot of spending programs. And we don't need more Republicans to go up there and say, oh, I've got to compromise with Nancy Pelosi. We need Republicans who will go up there and say, no, we're going to fight Nancy Pelosi and AOC and the Democrat agenda, and put forward our own agenda, which is one of freedom and one of letting people keep the money that they earn and decide for themselves how to spend it. One that says we're grounded in values and our faith. And I think there's a real contrast in this one, that Hightower not only is a great candidate, we were very comfortable supporting him, but I think the choice is very clear between the two.
And then moving on to AL2, and that's the race between former state representative Barry Moore and businessman Jeff Coleman, who I believe owns Coleman Moving Lines, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
That race is in District 2, where Martha Roby is retiring. Y'all have endorsed former state representative Barry Moore. Why did y'all endorse him in that race?
So Barry is one of these folks, and he was like this when he was in the state legislature. So almost a Tea Party champion that for the common man, and that typically means that they don't get a lot of financing from the big banks and the big donors. But Barry was able to win a place into the runoff based on his own really great work of mobilizing just average voters who believed in him and were passionate about him. And he is a true believer. He will be a constitutional conservative who will ask first, what is the right role of government? And that's what I'll vote for. And I'm not going to just buy into all the old deals that have been cut with Washington lobbyists and people looking to spend money and do things that really shouldn't be done in Washington. And so that made us really like Barry a lot. And again, I think there's a big contrast there, because you see that his opponent has, when he's been engaged with government, used it to further his own self-interest, to steer contracts to his company that you mentioned. And we don't need somebody in Washington who's going to be looking to line their own pockets. We need somebody who's going to look out for the common man and the families in Alabama.
Maybe pass a law in Congress that says when you're elected and while serving as an elected official in Washington or even at the state level, that your company can't compete for government contracts, period.
Yeah, you'd think there's a big conflict of interest there, right?
Yeah.
And I like your idea. And certainly I think the voters need to know about it, that he's not looking out for you. He's looking out for himself, number one.
Yeah, my introduction to Representative Moore was back in 2016 at Trump's first ever stadium-style campaign rally. He was the first elected official anywhere in the nation to endorse him, and he endorsed him right there at that rally that I was in attendance of. I was probably about 25 yards from the stage where Trump was speaking when all
Oh,
that was
that's
going
cool.
on.
How big was the rally audience then?
It was probably I'd probably say about 3/4 of the seating capacity of the stadium was in
Wow.
this in the stadium. Of course, a lot of them were on the field as well, field and not in the stands themselves, which means only about half the stands were filled.
Sure,
So
sure.
everybody combined, it was about
But
3/4 of the stadium.
that, if I remember correctly, that was back before Donald Trump was known by most people,
That was the
and
first ever
yeah,
stadium style rally. And what ended up happening with that was it was originally going to be held in a hotel in downtown Mobile, but so many people were trying to get tickets to go that they ended up moving it to the local civic center. And then it just kept growing and growing to the point they're like, okay, we'll just hold it in the football stadium.
wow, wow.
Uh,
And
but
Alabama has a good claim to be the state that propelled Trump into the nomination and then eventually into the White House, because it signaled a change for Super Tuesday state. We were engaged in that election, and I remember following that closely.
yeah, it has served Alabama quite well, and favorable outcomes when it comes to the Trump administration and decisions. While not everything we've wanted, like the frigate contract with Austal has happened, we have like some very important decisions have been favorable to Mobile. Like for example, going back to Airbus for a minute, when President Trump was placing tariffs on the European Union through the WTO dispute between Boeing and Airbus, and again, don't get me started on that. He exempted component parts coming to the Mobile, Alabama facility to be assembled here in Mobile from those tariffs. While I personally would like to have seen no tariffs on Airbus,
Right, right.
that made sense because those are American jobs right here in Mobile, Alabama, that would have been threatened had all the components on Airbus parts and planes been put in place. So that was a decision that said, okay, these are American jobs. These are American jobs in Alabama that that we need to protect. So we're going to make this special exemption for them. And that happened twice: the first round and the review 90 days later.
So, Dave, if I may, let me turn this now. It's perfect segue to the other conversation we wanted to have about the president's regulatory relief executive order. We've been pushing for this for 2 months, working with his staff, working with congressmen and senators to get momentum before it. And the other day, on Tuesday, he announced he was signing an executive order telling his cabinet officers, waive regulations that you don't need to protect safety and health, so that when we reopen the economy, businesses don't have the heavy burden of red tape, which ends up being about $15,000 per employee that a small businessman has to pay out to cover all the reports, regulations, things that Washington mandates and piles on. Brilliant move by the president. And so I want to invite you and your listeners, because he's followed up with us. He knew the Club for Growth was a big champion of this. And he said, okay, David, you've got to now talk to my cabinet officials and tell them which regulations are really bad. So if there are things down there that will help the port and help the economy, we're listening to everybody from around the country and collecting those ideas.
The one thing that I would recommend personally is if it can be waived and can be permanently waived, they should be looked at. Those regulations should be looked at the federal level and state levels, completely removed permanently. Like for example, a lot of barber shops and nail salons are learning the other side of that double-edged sword, I like to call it, from going to the government and asking for them to put a permission slip in place to enter into their industry to compete with them. The government will be more than willing to do that because they creates revenue for them. But when it turns around that they need you to do something and you're not as willing to do it, they're willing to dangle that permission slip saying, if you don't do what you want us to do, we're going to take this away from you. And
Yeah.
so the government needs to, if it's not completely essential, like obviously doctors having a medical license is essential because that's literally life and death decisions. But barbershops, car
Yeah.
salesmen in Louisiana, if it can be better handled through insurance requirements, get rid of the government license, the government permission slip permanently, so that way the government has less chance of and less power in the future to be overburdensome to businesses and the American people and the economy.
I agree with you completely. Plus, it keeps the door open for people who, they want to start something on their own life. They want to enter into the profession of cutting hair or become a car salesman and have that opportunity. Now you have to have connections to get that, right? In the
Exactly.
end, and so I'm all for that. The licensing is one of the worst things we do, and the economists will even tell you when they study it, yeah, it's a way that the existing businesses keep the door shut on competition, and so it's actually bad for the customers as well.
Yeah. Real quickly before we go, how can people find out more information about Club for Growth? Where can they go to on Twitter or Facebook? Do you have a website, anything like that?
We do clubforgrowth.org, and that's all spelled out, club, F-O-R, growth.org. And if you Google us, Club for Growth and elections of candidates, it'll all come up and be able to find it. There is a Twitter account and a Facebook account. I don't know the handles on those.
Probably have connect links to them on your website, don't you?
Yeah, we do. And you can join for free, and becoming a member lets you get, the law requires us to keep certain information for members only, like who we've endorsed, what the races are like. But it's very easy to join and no financial commitment. Now we'll send members information about who we endorse and say, if you like this person, send them $10 or whatever. But you don't have to make that commitment in order to join and learn about the things that we're doing.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. McIntosh, and we'll hope to have you again on soon, especially talk more regulations, maybe get a little bit more into to aviation and Boeing and all that good stuff. So thank you for joining
Yeah,
us.
I would enjoy coming back, and everybody remember to vote. The runoffs are coming up, and it's going to be important.
July 14th.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Absolutely. Good to talk to you.
That was David McIntyre, the president of the Club for Growth PAC out of Washington, D.C., talking about the congressional runoffs that will be held on July 14th, as well as the Senate runoff between Jeff Sessions and Tommy Tuberville. To find out more about them, go to their website, clubforgrowth.org, and sign up to become a member. We'll be right back after this message. I want to take a minute to talk about a charity we think a lot of here at BamaNewsNow.com, and that is the Fisher House. The Fisher House, the easiest way to explain it is, you know what the Ronald McDonald House is for children's hospitals around the country? That's basically what Fisher House is for VA facilities. Whenever a veteran is injured or at a facility, the families of the veteran will fly to wherever their family member is and be able to stay at the Fisher House facility that is there in conjunction with that facility, free of charge, with other family members of other veterans that are also in that facility. And they can kind of have a community, a support group, while their family members are in that VA facility. I would strongly encourage you to go to fisherhouse.org to find out more about the charity and what they do and the work that they do, and consider donating either your time or your money to the organization, because it is very worthwhile. They also have one of the best ratings when it comes to their financial prowess, and they rank amongst the top charities in the world of the percentage of each dollar that they raise going to the actual mission of the charity. And that is impressive. I would encourage you to go to fisherhouse.org to make that donation or to find out more. Welcome back to the BamaNewsNow.com podcast. I am joined by Brent Buchanan of Cygnal. It's a polling organization. Are you based out of Montgomery or are you based out of Washington?
We got our start in Montgomery, Alabama. Still have a presence there among other cities, but our home office is in DC now.
Well, congratulations on moving to the big leagues. The reason I asked you to come on is because your organization just released a poll recently after the coronavirus shutdowns and stuff in the Alabama Senate runoff on the Republican side, and kind of explain to our listeners what that poll said, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, definitely. So we, as you mentioned, are originally from Alabama. We know a lot about Alabama. Out of the 1,200 political polls we've done in 46 states across the country, I'd venture to say that 300 of them are in Alabama. So we really know the state well. We know the state's electorate, especially the Republican primary electorate, because that's what 90% of the elections in Alabama, if not more than that. I may be being generous with that statistic, but Republican primaries are what matter in the state. So
the Republican primaries are the general election.
Exactly. Yeah. The general election is almost a formality. And so we've been doing surveys about Alabama U.S. Senate election since 2017, because we've been running for this seat essentially nonstop since 2017, with Luther Strange's appointment and Jeff Sessions going to the Senate, and now he's back full circle in this. And so and throughout that whole process, we've been able to nail turnout as part of the process. And that's why our numbers have been so accurate. So, we've got this. Back in March, we did a survey, and Tommy Tuberville was up on Jeff Sessions by 20 points. And basically what that means is that a lot of the Bradley Byrne voters and other, minor candidates have gravitated towards Coach Tuberville, and that around 33-34% is where Jeff Sessions was in March. And I think he's only at 35-36% now. So he hasn't moved at all. All the movement has been towards Tommy Tuberville. And so now we show Tuberville up by 23 points. And what's really more interesting and more important is what's called intensity of support. And so that is how many people are saying, I will definitely vote for a candidate versus I'll probably vote for a candidate. When you see a number of X versus Y in a percentage, that's usually a cumulative of definitely and probably. And so among definite supporters, Sessions only has 19% definite support, and Tuberville has 37% definite support, which is more support than Sessions' combined support. So his hardcore supporters are a greater share of the electorate than Jeff Sessions' total hardcore and likely supporters. And so with that, I look through what are called the crosstabs, which are the questions against the questions. So, how did men answer the question versus women compared to the overall number? And I could not find a single favorable number for former Senator and former Attorney General Jeff Sessions.
That's interesting.
The only group that Sessions led with was by 4 points, and it was those who don't like Donald Trump. And let me tell you how many people are Republican primary voters in Alabama that don't like Donald Trump. You might be able to count them on your hands and toes.
Wow. Go back for a minute when you saying that a lot of Bradley Burns supporters, it looks like in the polling that they have broken towards Coach Tuberville. That's the anecdotal sentiment that I got on election night when it looked like that Bradley Burns wasn't going to make the runoff, that a lot of the voters that I spoke to at his victory party, now I guess this is anecdotal, there's no scientific research behind it, they were all upset that and felt like Senator Sessions betrayed Tommy Tuberville by jumping in the race, not Tommy Tuberville, excuse me, Bradley Byrne at the last minute, because, you know, both of them being from Mobile, naturally they probably drew from a lot of the same base of support, and they felt that's why Bradley Byrne did so poorly, is because Jeff Sessions got in at the last minute, and they said, if he's going to do that to Byrne, I'm not going to support him in the runoff. At least that's what they were telling me.
Well, that would make a lot of sense. I mean, you also have to look at the dynamics of a campaign. And the dynamics of a campaign it starts with the candidates, the candidate quality, the candidate story, the candidate talent, and then it's supported by money. You know, no amount of money is going to turn a bad candidate into a good candidate. It just would. I always say money magnifies.
I think so we learned that in 2017, didn't we?
Yeah, you got to start with a good product first. Luther Strange, for example, is one of the nicest people I've ever met. He is a great public servant. He is not a good candidate. You put him one-on-one, he wins votes. You put him one in front of a crowd and he loses votes. Money magnified that problem for Luther. You know, Tommy Tuberville is just a man for the moment right now. And it's a lot like Trump in a way that it would be hard to replicate what Tommy Tuberville's done outside of getting Nick Saban to run. Like, there's just some things that you can't duplicate. And, you know, I can't tell you how many candidates we've worked with since 2016 that are like, I want to follow the Donald Trump playbook. And I'm like, okay, well, let me give you the checklist of the Donald Trump playbook. You have to have been in the media for 30 years. You have to be an arrogant billionaire from New York. You have to have had a television show. You have to have started with 99% name identification. So after you check those boxes, I will run the Donald Trump campaign for you.
Mm-hmm. And
Tuberville's kind of the same way. Like, how do you replicate a former football coach that's pretty dynamic and got star power?
Oh yeah, and he's very charismatic as well. He's very, and I asked him every time I meet him, I always ask him this question: is like, which do you like better, and which do you like recruiting better or do you like campaigning better? And he's like, in a lot of ways, it's the same thing.
It is.
And he's right.
You're putting on a show. You're putting on a show for the voters, and you have to make an emotional, visceral connection with them. Yeah. And he has done that. And Jeff Sessions, who, like Luther Strange, a great policy person, a great human being, that doesn't translate. That translates to the logical decision-making process, and humans are built to make emotional decisions.
Yeah. One question.
And when you defend yourself all the time, which is all Sessions has done since he got in this race, was defend himself. I don't think anybody could tell you what is Jeff Sessions going to do or do differently. All they know is that he's defended himself on various factors the entire election.
The only thing I can tell you is that he keeps saying that he's going to continue to push the Trump agenda, which was his agenda before Trump came into politics, which is true once he gets back into the Senate. And a lot of people, because of what happened with him when he was Attorney General in the Russian investigation, don't necessarily believe he's going to do that, because they felt like he betrayed the president when he recused himself in the Russian investigation, regardless if it was the right thing to do or not.
Yeah, looking at the electorate from our survey, you know, seniors are the core electorate of most elections. They're the beyond core electorate of Republican primaries. And that's the group Sessions does best with. And among that group, he's losing by 9 points.
Wow. And that's a great segue into my next question, which is, were you able to ascertain how the events of the last couple of months with the coronavirus, the lockdowns, the reopening of society, the fears about getting out in large groups of people and having, especially seniors who tend to work a lot of the polls on election day, being exposed to a great number of different people showing up for a runoff? Have you able to ascertain what kind of effect that's going to have on the electorate in July?
So I have private data, so I'll speak anecdotally to your question. And then we've also done similar surveys around coronavirus impact in Georgia, Kentucky, Colorado, Pennsylvania. So like we've got a pretty good set of data in our minds of what impact this is having electorally. And so in every survey we've done since coronavirus has started, we ask the question, has the pandemic, good and bad, changed your view of participation in the election? It's more nuanced than that, but that's the gist of the question. Does it make you more or less interested or have no impact? Most of these surveys, especially in Republican primaries, it's like 1% to 2% less likely to vote.
Okay.
And I don't know if that's partially because there have been restrictions lifted on mail-in voting. And so what is normally, 1%, 2% of a turnout for an election could potentially be 10, 12, 15, 20% in Alabama. In some states it's going to be, it was like 60% or so in Wisconsin in their spring election, April 7th, which was like the very first thing we have to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of these surveys that we're seeing, 40 to 50% of people are saying that it's making them more likely to go vote. And that makes a lot of sense when you compare it with academic research around why people vote. And the biggest factor in turnout is anger. The second biggest factor in turnout is anxiety. We've been on lockdowns. The economy's in shambles. People are losing jobs. Everything that they knew is not normal anymore. It is creating anger and anxiety. And so, yes, we may see a little bit less turnout. I think that's possible, just because people may decide like, oh, well, I actually don't want to go to a poll if they're only going to have a couple open, and those are your lower propensity voters that they're not thinking about the election until the day of the election. But those who are definite voters, they're going to find a way to vote, whether that's Alabama didn't really offer early voting, but in a lot of other states, early voting, mail voting,
they have really relaxed.
And wait in line.
They have really relaxed the reasons for absentee ballot voting with this runoff. I'm on the Secretary of State's press release list, and every week I'm getting a new press release. So many days left to apply for an absentee ballot. So they're really pushing that absentee ballot, especially if you don't feel comfortable getting out and voting.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think it's going to have a huge impact on turnout because, if we look at the 2017 special election primary, we actually had more turnout in the runoff when it was a binary choice between between two candidates compared to the first round where we had Mo Brooks and the whole gamut of individuals running. So just something that to keep in mind, like this is a primary electorate. If this was an off-year general election, or in states like Louisiana that vote in the odd year, Louisiana, Mississippi, Kentucky, others, like maybe it would affect that electoral population, but I don't think it's going to affect a primary much because that's a different breed of voter anyways. Like that's your super voter already. So it would take a lot for them not to participate.
Yeah. Now, in the primary, we had some geographic distinctions between the different candidates. Obviously, Bradley Byrne won his district. Jeff Sessions did a little bit better up north, and Tuberville did better in the more rural areas, which makes sense because he was endorsed by the farmers early on. Are those geographic tendencies holding up, and who is making up the ground in the areas that Bradley Byrne won in his district?
That's a really good question. Let me look at the results by urbanity. So you've got about a 30-point spread lead for Tuberville in the rural areas of the state right now, according to our survey from last week. That lead shrinks a little bit when you get into the suburban areas. It's about 25 points for Tuberville. And then it goes to 20 points in the urban areas. So, you definitely do see that distinction. And like I was talking about earlier of intensity of support, 43% of rural Alabama is definitely Tommy Tuberville. 29% of suburban Alabama is definitely Tommy Tuberville, which is actually only 7 points higher than the definitely Jeff Sessions. So, if you're Jeff Sessions, the suburbs are your haven. That's where you're going to go try to get as much vote as you can, because almost half or more of the 58% of the rural vote is pretty locked up. So like if you're going to go carve away at the margins. If you're Sessions, you go do it in the suburbs because you're a little bit better there. And then the only reason I'm not talking about urban, because there's not a lot of true urban Republican primary voters that would consider themselves urban. Like maybe they live in Hoover, but they call that a suburb. Maybe they live in Huntsville, but because they don't live downtown in 5 Points, they live out, on the legends that they consider themselves.
Or they live in
suburban.
West Mobile, but they're still in the city limits of Mobile.
Correct. Yeah. They're out by the airport, but they don't consider themselves urbanites. They consider themselves suburbanites.
Yeah, trust me, I'm one of those people. I live west of 65, and I grew up in when I've been in the Mobile area over 26 years, but I grew up and graduated in Daphne and spent 20 years, almost 20 years of my life in Daphne, and I consider everything west of 65 the West Mobile. But I was corrected by an old Mobilian that no, technically everything west of Florida Street is West Mobile. I'm like,
that's almost all of Mobile at this point.
Yeah. I was like, if you really wanted to get technical, everything west of Broad Street could be considered West Mobile, because that was the outer city limits during the antebellum and Civil War time period. But that's going way, way back. But so what you're saying is it's looking good for Tommy Tuberville. He's just got to keep plugging along and making sure that his voters, especially the ones that are really revved up and excited about his candidacy, get out to vote on July 14th. And it looks like he will probably most likely be the Republican nominee in November.
Which automatically makes him the next U.S. Senator in November.
True. Of course, they all said that about Roy Moore in 2017 as well.
Well, let's talk about 2017 for a second. So Democrats outspend Roy Moore, Jones and the outside groups spent 25 million more. Some say 30 million more than Roy Moore and the outside groups, which weren't really many of them because they'd pulled out. And the guy still almost wins. He only loses by 30,000 votes. I think that's the story that's lost, that Trump is not on the ballot in 2017. Roy Moore, all his flaws, and no money, almost wins against 25 or 30 million dollars. So and I like Doug, but as a person, not as his ideology or how he votes, but there's no way with Donald Trump on the ballot that he can win. Mm-hmm. None. You could put Roy Moore back on the ballot and that man would win by 6 figures votes.
I would completely agree with you. And I'm one that actually didn't vote in the 2017 special election, general election, because I've never been a Roy Moore fan. And so I wasn't excited to go out and vote. And I was coming back from a vacation on that day and getting in late. I was like, you know what? He's probably going to win anyway. And so I'm not going to go vote. And I'd be okay if Doug Jones won anyway. So I didn't end up voting. So and there was probably, and there's a lot of Republicans, because Roy Moore always polls low, does worse in the returns amongst all Republicans than any other Republican in the field. And when he's on the ballot, he gets less votes than any other Republican statewide that's on the same ballot.
Yeah.
So, and he's just that polarizing. And so even amongst some Republicans, he's not a appealing candidate. But like you said, Tommy Tuberville, football coach, charismatic, looks the part. He's not a bad looking guy. And, you and I both know that that plays a part into the political process as well. I mean, we had George Bush, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama all win the presidency as young men, and they weren't bad looking presidents when they were elected. Now, when they got out of office, that was a different story. Because
it has to do with first impressions.
Yeah.
So we all make snap judgments as first impressions. And if somebody is attractive or has like an aura, I don't know how to describe that any other way, we pick up on that viscerally as people. Mm-hmm. And so it just, like as I was saying earlier, candidate quality matters a lot, and it's the first thing that matters, and it's the hub on which all the spokes are built.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with you. And I've been following politics since I was 8 years old. Well, thank you for joining us, Brent. is pleasure talking with you, and I enjoy talking to you. Hopefully we can have you on again, maybe after the runoff, and see how the general election is shaping up. Like you said, it's probably going to, the general election for this race is probably going to be July 14th, but you never know, because the Democrats are going to have, and Doug Jones has already got a lot of money saved up in the bank to spend on the general election. He's not spending any of it in the primary. So,
well, I hope his folks make a lot of money, because it's a one-shot wonder on this one.
Yeah, so I mean, it'll be interesting to see. So thank you for joining us, and like I said, we'll hope to have you get back again soon. And if anybody wants to find out more about what Cygnal does polling-wise, where can they go?
Yeah, that's good. So we don't spell Cygnal normally. It's CYGNAL, and our website address is cygn.al. But if you go to Google and type in CYGNAL, we'll pop up first, so you can look up that way too.
That was an interesting way of getting to the top of the search results.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us, and hope to have you back again soon.
All right, thanks, David. Bye.
Everybody knows about St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital in Memphis. It's a worthwhile cause. I would encourage you to go to their website, stjude.org, to donate or to find out more about what they do. Basically, what St. Jude's Research Hospital does is they treat children with childhood cancers free of charge to the family, which is important in a time like that when there's so much stress on the parents, so much to worry about with the child. And they don't just treat the cancer, they treat the whole patient. If you've ever walked into or spent time at St. Jude's, you realize it's not a sad place. It's a very joyful place where they're always making the kids smile, laugh. They've got things to do for the kids. It's just a wonderful place. They have lots and lots of dedicated staff members that work very hard every day to not only help children beat their cancer, but to enrich their lives and make them better. So again, I encourage you to go to stjude.org to find out more about St. Jude and to donate either your time or your money to that worthwhile cause. Welcome back to the Bama News Now podcast. I'm your host, David Preston, and I am here with author Mary S. Palmer. Welcome, Miss Palmer.
Thank you very much.
You've written a new book, haven't you?
Yes, I have. It's kind of a different type of book from some of the others I've had published.
And it's about a subject called the Boyington Oak. What is the Boyington Oak?
The Boyington Oak is a tree that grew after a young man was hanged for a murder. And the title of the book is Boyington Oak, A Grave Injustice. And it's the story of a legend of Charles R.S. Boyington. And this creative nonfiction book has it all. It's got crime and history and romance and mystery. And it began in 1833, when 19-year-old Charles Boyington came to Mobile from New Haven, Connecticut. And what he did was he worked his way down here as a sailor on a boat. And then he quickly got a job as a printer. He was rather young to be a printer because it requires a lot of training, but he had completed his journeymanship. And ambitious, he managed to inveigle himself in the Mobile society, and he met Rose de Fleur. And Rose was the daughter of Baron de Fleur, who had been in Napoleon's army, and when it fell, then they moved here to this country. So it was quite a story. They fell in love, and he wrote beautiful poetry for her. He had quite a talent for this. And since her father objected to the courtship, they had to sneak around to meet. So he went wherever he knew she would be. Mobile was very small then. I think it ended way before Broad Street from the river. So they had places they could go and meet. And they spent a lot of time in the woods around Oakley. Charles shared a room in a boarding house with another printer, and they became best friends. And the guy's name was Nathaniel Frost. And he was ill with consumption, which you probably know is tuberculosis. But he was still allowed to work. One of my interviews was with a Dr. Show because I wanted to know how much they knew about germs in those days. And they did know something about them, but not enough to do any kind of restrictions like they would do today, and certainly nothing like we've had with this pandemic.
Was the health department in Mobile created by then? I know I've read several books about antebellum Mobile, and I know that the Mobile County Health Department was actually established before the state's Department of Health was, which is one of the reasons why they have so much autonomy over Mobile. Was the health department in Mobile in existence back during this time, or was this some?
I'm not sure about that. I just know that there weren't, very many regulations like, came about with health departments. But that's an interesting question. Charles took care of this friend. Just imagine them living in the same room. And I have to put myself in the era to understand what they were actually going through. And I couldn't say, oh, he went in the bathroom and shaved. He would have to go to the bowl in the room, and just think about the contamination there when they were sharing things, water and things like that in their room. And so there was lots of danger, but the man was allowed, the other man, Nathaniel Frost, was allowed to keep his job. And what happened, though, was Charles, he got to writing too much poetry, and he got fired. So it kind of made it difficult. He was fired from his job, and with gambling debts, he was a gambler, and they had a red light district in Mobile down around Theater Street at that time, and he spent some time there. He got in a situation that required him to think about leaving town. So he had planned to leave town all along and go back to visit his mother. But with those debts hanging over his head, he left Mobile on May 20th, 1834. And the same day that Nathaniel Frost was murdered in the Church Street graveyard. So he was suspicious. The next thing that happened, though, during the trial was that they had two unqualified jurors. One was a British citizen, and the other was a person who believed Charles was guilty from the beginning. And he vowed that he would hang him if the judge did not. So he had a reason not to have been, rather to have had a mistrial, let's say. Charles was hanged in the woods over there somewhere near Oakley. We don't know, it's not on record exactly where it happened, but it was in that area where they used to picnic. And he said, an oak tree will grow from my grave to prove I'm innocent, and sooner or later I'll be vindicated. And it did grow, and it's still there today, 185 years later. I realized a lot of oak trees grow, and when I was down there taking pictures, I didn't know which tree it was at the beginning because it isn't marked. But I'll get to that later. But I just took pictures of all of them, and I thought there's a lot of acorns here. However, we have a lot of hurricanes, so even if a tree grew, it could have been felled.
Sorry, that's my dog barking.
Oh, okay. I thought you were telling me that.
No.
So the photo of that tree is on the book. It's the same tree.
That's a beautiful picture, by the way.
Thank you very much.
Did you take that picture yourself?
I did, but I've been a professional photographer in the past. Only one other book has been written about this story, and it's called The Tree. It's a short book, like 105 pages. As far as I can tell, it must have been produced on an extremely limited basis, because it's just like in a form where you could get to it in the library but not actually have the book. I don't want to speak too much to that because I'm not positive, but I don't know if it ever was really in book form.
Well, let's go back for a minute and you talk about the jury. You said there were a couple of unqualified jurors, and one of them was not a citizen of the United States. That was a British citizen, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
That's a no-no.
Yeah, that's a big no-no. I mean, that's an obvious no-no because, I mean, they're not a citizen. You're not qualified to serve on an American jury, just like an American wouldn't be qualified to serve on a British jury.
Right.
But the other guy, the one that said, that you say went into the jury thinking that Boyington was guilty from the beginning. How do we know that he felt that way? That that he felt that Boyington was guilty even before being selected on the jury.
Okay, because I looked at I researched for a year and went to all kind of old papers and everything else, and I have actual documentation from news clips that said this man, and it names him and it names the British juror. So it was a matter of record from these newspaper things. Everything I did was documented. I went back to the news. There was no photography in 1833. There wasn't any photography till 1839 with Daguerre. But they had these clips, and I even got a sketch of the boat, and I have a lot of other things in there, that prove this is true. But having those two names was very helpful. I had to do a year's worth of research to find what I felt like I needed, and I did end notes and I did a bibliography. So was this trial Mobile's 1830s version of the trial of the century, where everybody and who's who of Mobile society showed up to watch the trial, or was this a small affair held on the outskirts of town that nobody really knew about at the time? It was held in the courthouse. It was well attended, and something that I consider really, really gruesome is that when he was convicted, and then he wasn't hanged till the next February the 10th. But when he was hanged, there were about 3,190 people in Mobile at the time, but people came from far away, and they considered this an event, and they considered it entertaining. And he marched from what's now County Charlotte House. He marched from there, which was Mobile's first jail, down around the courthouse and down to the area where he was hanged, down near Broad Street, let's say. And people were sitting there having picnic lunches. One person actually, I have a report of what this one person with the young child had to say about it, because it was just kind of gruesome to this kid. And he didn't ever forget it, so he told about it later, and it was a matter of record. So they made a party out of this hanging. There was no records of the original trial. There was a record of the appeal, which I was able to use.
So what did he appeal his conviction on? What basis did it? Was it based off of the unqualified jurors, or was it based on fact, or what was the appeal based on?
Well, the appeal was based on a couple of different things. His lawyers weren't too swifty. They didn't help him out too much, but he
obviously.
But he didn't. It was rejected, and so he didn't really get anywhere with that. But it surprised me that he was very generous in his expressions about the judge and about his lawyers. He really didn't fault any of them. So that was a surprise to me, as usually people would get angry with their lawyers and with the judge if they're convicted to be hanged. But he kept insisting he was innocent. The trial was flawed, and the conviction was based only on circumstantial evidence. That was another thing. There were no real witnesses. So what came about later, I formed the Boyington Oak Society, and with the help of the Historic Mobile Preservation Society, we've applied for a grant, which Alabama Power Company made me aware of, to replace the marker on the gravesite. There was a marker there in 1905, which the murdered man, Nathaniel Frost's friends, put up just so they could say that this was the man that killed their friend. And then there was another marker there in 1971, but nobody knows what happened to those markers. So we've gotten it going now. Hopefully we will get a new marker, and they'll put it up right by the
When
tree.
do y'all think y'all hear about the grant?
through a lady who wrote me from the power company, and her job is to make people aware of grants of this nature.
No, I think, when do you think they'll make a decision on the grant?
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I believe it's May the 23rd.
Oh, so we're right around the corner.
Yeah, right around the corner. We had to get all kinds of things to prove everything, and had to have a certain number of characters that you could have on it. But that's all done with the help of a man named Rich Gunderson. So, yeah.
Now, this declaration that he made about the oak tree growing where his grave would be to prove his innocence, was this a dying declaration that he made right before he hung, or was this made during the trial? Or
he made it, I think mostly not too long before he was hung, but I think he also said something about it right after the trial, that this was going to happen, that he was going to have this tree grow. And the fact that it survived the hurricanes and all is what I was talking about a while ago, that lots of trees grow. You can find 1 million acorns right in that area. But there's been storms and other things. Some trees just die, don't they?
Yeah. Well, has the Boyington Oak Society, are they working on putting up a historical marker at the tree to kind of let people know that want to go look for it, where the tree is and what the significance of the tree, the story behind the tree is?
That's it. It will have information. And then people who lead these ghost things, the walks and things, they can tell the rest of the story, because it's very limited how many characters we could have on the marker itself.
Now, is this going to be a historical marker or a grave marker?
It will be a historical marker.
Okay. See, I thought you were saying that it was going to be a grave marker. I was like,
no, it would be there at the grave site. But the only marker there now is it's on a tree trail, but it doesn't say anything about Boyington at all. It just has a number, and it's old and rusty. But this one would be more designating it as the Boyington Oak, just with this name and the date. And then, like I said, people like Todd Duran, who conducts these ghost tours, he can tell more about it.
well, is that all that the society is trying to do, or are they?
No, we have other goals. We found descendants of Boyington who would like to see their name cleared. So I've appealed to the Bureau of Pardon and Paroles, but in Montgomery, moved up to Mobile first, then moved to Montgomery, and after months of waiting, I found out that the only posthumous pardons, or maybe pardons of any sort, that they give, and this is, she sent me the ruling number, I don't have it in front of me, with cases of racial discrimination, which would be unfair. So I took it a step further, and the members of the Boyington Oak Society are writing, and I've written to legislators, and I also wrote to Bradley Byrne, and he's agreed to help us. He had his aide call me, and he's going to help us to get a bill of some sort to amend that law to make it include other than just cases of racial discrimination.
Now, let's remind everybody, Bradley Byrne is the U.S. House of Representatives member for Alabama House District 1, which includes Mobile.
Right. And we've solicited the help of Alabama senators and representatives. And when we had the launch party, which was at Oakley in November, we had a petition there for this cause. So I have 55 signatures of people who came to that gathering with their names, addresses, emails, and I've sent them copies of this to reinforce that this is something that other citizens would like to see happen.
So if the governor wanted to, she wouldn't even be able to issue a pardon for Mr. Boyington because of the law.
That was the answer that I got from her. Yes, I sent her a letter, and she responded in that regard. And, we'll just have to see what happens. I did find out that this is the right approach to try to get the law changed to be more inclusive. Also, then next you can go back to the governor for some reinforcement. The last resort would be the President of the United States, but the information I got said that a president has only issued 3 such pardons ever. But I'm hoping that the legislators will see fit to act and to support us. Also, I wrote a one-act play which was produced at Gulf Quest Museum they hosted it. It was a memorial service with some ghosts, and we were supposed to repeat that play at DAR, Richard's DAR house early in May, but of course that didn't materialize. But we will do it over, and this is the other goal, is to work this into a 3-act play, which I can write hopefully this summer, and then try to get it annually at Oakley. So it would be something like To Kill a Mockingbird or the Miracle Worker play in Tuscany and Kill a Mockingbird in Monroeville. And that was our goal. And possibly it could be other than at Oakley. I mean, none of the details of that have been worked out. We've had one meeting of the Boyington Oak Society, and we plan another one just as soon as this is lifted, hopefully in June. So anyone who's interested, can let me know. Mobile has no such event now. But the trial had a huge impact. It changed both the way that circumstantial evidence was viewed and the way jurors were selected. And these changes had a rippling effect. It wasn't just in Alabama, but in nearby states and other places. They took a look at this. And it was very interesting. I discovered in my research that John Tyson's great-grandfather heard a case in 1894 in Haneyville, Alabama, where the defense lawyer came up and said, well, look at the Boyington case. You shouldn't be judging people simply on circumstantial evidence. So that reinforced that again. And I think the way jurors were chosen is probably a lot more strict than it used to be. These changes weren't just linked to Alabama, they went on. And so I think the book really has universal appeal because this could be anywhere, it could happen. I was told to get a constitutional lawyer, so I got a constitutional lawyer to write a blurb for the back of the book, and if you happen to see that, his name is Ken Wall, and he said this should never have happened in Alabama or anywhere else for that matter, so that's kind of a reinforcing statement. And he's a teacher out there.
If you ask a lot of people, especially people that work with the Innocence Project, they say that it still happens today a lot more than we would like to admit as a country.
Lots of things to do. I have a big statement in here. Justice should be tempered with mercy. So I feel like that's important. That was in my play. And Charles' last word from the gallows were, sooner or later, I'll be vindicated. Well, it's later now, much later, and it's not too late. And I hope his statement will be proven true. There's some other interesting twists that happen in the book, and I don't want to give it all away. I'd rather have readers search and read it for themselves. And you can also see a video of showing scenes of where all this happened on my website. My website is www.maryspalmer.com.
That's good. And is that where people can go to buy the book? Can they go to Amazon? What book retailers are?
They're available at Amazon. They're available at the Haunted Bookshop in Mobile. They're available at Gulf Quest. They're available at the store. I think it's Serpentines, I believe is the name of the store, on Government Street, right next to Popeye, 750 something Government Street, 950. And Barnes and Noble and various other independent bookstores. And if you'd like a signed copy, you can go to my website and contact me with the PayPal, and also you can contact me at my email address, mlsp0121@gmail.com. And I'm doing other presentations soon, as soon as this quarantine's over, for the paralegals here in Mobile and at a convention at Gulf Shores in August with the paralegals of Alabama and other places as well. And anyone who's interested in the meetings, I'd like for them to let me know, because we do plan to have another meeting for the Boyington Oak Society soon. And I think it's just a really interesting story that is universal, that people might not have exactly the same thing in their cities, but as you said, there are inequities that should be corrected. So I'm really intent on doing this. I'm like a dog with a bone. I want to get this done, to get the posthumous part and then get the marker in place and preserve history.
Are you afraid that once you exonerate him and get his pardon, that the oak is going to die?
No, but I thought about it. I did. I thought, what if a hurricane comes and the oak goes down? That would be. Ooh.
Well, see, I think if with the legend, your legend that the oak is there, there to grow to prove his innocence.
Yeah.
Once his innocence is restored, the oak doesn't have to serve any purpose because he'll have been proven innocent.
Same thoughts I do. I just hope it doesn't happen because I like the history of the oak. I think it's so eerie to go down that stand. Some people have said they can lean against the tree and hear voices, but I can't do that. I didn't do that. But one of the descendants has been here several times. He's joined the society. He lives in Dothan now, Preston Boyington, and he leaned against the tree. And I have a picture of that, of him leaning against the tree. He said he didn't hear anything, but you never know. It's odd. It's creepy.
Well, Ms. Palmer, thank you for joining us here at the BamaNewsNow.com podcast. I encourage anybody that's into history or true crime novels or even crime novels to check out the book. It's called The Boyington Oak. What's the subtitle again?
A Grave Injustice.
A Grave Injustice. And they can find that on Amazon as well as their as local retailers here in Mobile. If they're not here in Mobile, maybe they're in Birmingham or maybe even in Cleveland, Ohio, they can probably go to Amazon and find it, right?
Well, I have one more little statement to make that one interview I had with WKRG, man, Arborist was there, and he said, think about this, because his body was down there in the ground, some of his body has grown up in the tree, so his body is embedded in the tree, which is gross, but it makes sense.
Yeah, well, it does make sense, and if it is the Boyington Oak, you want it to have a little bit of him in there. So
right, that's true. Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it immensely, and I hope people will take a look at the book. And if they want a speaker or presentation of something, just contact me through my email address.
Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
That was author Mary S. Palmer, the author of the book The Boyington Oak, A Grave Injustice. Go to Amazon.com or her website, MarySPalmer.com, to order the book, or go to her website to find out more information or request that she come speak to your organization about her book. Thank you for joining us this week, and I would like to thank our guests, David McIntosh of the Club for Growth, Brent Buchanan of Cygnal Polling, and Mary Palmer, who is the author of the Boyington Oak book, for joining us. Music, as always, is provided by Jason Shaw of Audionautics.com. Join us again next week when we talk to Alabama 1st Congressional District candidate Kiani Gardner about how her race is going in the Democratic primary runoff against her opponent James Averhart, as well as an interesting story about her donating a kidney during this coronavirus pandemic. Join us again next week.